Green is the night, green kindled and apparelled. It is she that walks among astronomers. She strides above the rabbit and the cat, like a noble figure out of the sky, moving among the sleepers, the men, those that lie chanting, green is the night. Green is the night, and out of madness woven, the self-same madness of the astronomers, and of him that sees beyond the astronomers, the topaz rabbit and the emerald cat, that sees above them, that sees rise above them, the noble figure, the essential shadow, moving and being the image at its source, the abstract, the archaic queen. Green is the night.
Carles was the bridge.
He was independent, he was self-motivated.
A shot in the arm with brand new ideas and really revolutionized painting in this country.
The use of color, the use of unprecedented ways of expressing oneself.
Outpouring of excitement.
You could say that there's a terrific luminosity because of the conjunction of the color.
Every time I see one of his paintings, it's like seeing it again. They're really alive.
They get under your skin. You have to really look at them for a long time.
To be a painter was almost a sacred undertaking.
He was interested in a canvas that would sing.
Carles is a fascinating figure, both in the history of American art and in the history of art emerging from Philadelphia.
He bridges the 19th century and the 20th century, and he also bridges Philadelphia and Paris, which was his biggest inspiration, French modern art.
Carles's genius was his openness to color and movement, abstraction, cubism.
People forget how very lively Philadelphia was culturally. There is Arthur Carles, there are his friends and collectors and enthusiasts of modern art.
They were interested in Albert Einstein, new ideas of relativity.
You had Freud, you had Einstein. It was like all the expectations and ways of looking at things were being sort of blown apart.
They were caught up in the intellectual forefront.
He was 10 years ahead of other artists that became famous as abstract expressionists.
Look at the old pictures of Philadelphia. I mean, we had streetcars going all over the place. Clang, 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 clang.
Street life was wonderfully rich. The trolley cars went booming by our house. There were lovely old ladies in little electrical cars, and they were so great. Oh, we had no electricity in our house whatsoever. So it was lit by gas, and I remember the lamplighter coming along, and he had a little platform, and he went up the platform and lit the gas street lights.
He saw the first cars, he saw, telephones coming in, and people, as they do today, had the sense then that life was speeding up and becoming faster and faster.
Philadelphia was a very genteel city, like Boston.
They were pretty stodgy, very stodgy.
Upper classes were clustered around Rittenhouse Square in the beautiful brownstones that remain there today.
And in Philadelphia had a lot of segregation on a social level. We had the Main Line and Chestnut Hill. And
there was a great separation between the suburbs and the city. I think there was a greater separation then than there is now. This was a town of many strong communities and strong family relationships.
Carles had gone to an Episcopal church in the neighborhood. He had been in the choir and he had taught Sunday school. He was very nurtured, very much sort of the center of attention. His father encouraging him in his art. His mother, I think, was quite supportive. He was close to her. So you kind of seeing him as being sort of the crown prince kind of this little, the lower middle class family. They also had a billiards table. He and his father played billiards. He was asked, what should a young art student do? And Carles said he should play billiards. That's how an art student could learn about space and motion and direction and sort of composition.
They loved that idea of the interaction of colors against the background. Some of them merged, some of them separated, some of them opposed each other, conflicted. And they took the spectrum, the way Einstein took the spectrum, and they began to show us the reality that had always been there.
Tell him to play billiards. On that green surface and within that frame, he will find the equilibrium, symmetry, triangulation, direction, motion, and restraint of all art.
Carles was somebody that had fun, liked to have a good time, loved conversation. He was known for having just a wonderful wit. He wasn't just a recluse in the studio.
He had this wonderful training at first at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And that academic background of hand-eye coordination, of vision, of rapid sketching, of realistic representation, he was excellent in terms of the academic.
He won prizes. He was considered to be one of the top students. John Trask, who was the head of the Academy, got him a commission to do an altarpiece for a Philadelphia church. The commission was to copy a Raphael major painting of the Transfiguration, which has Jesus rising up in the clouds and a number of figures down below. Very large, very complicated painting.
Mountains are very important in Scripture. You have the mountain of Transfiguration, coupled with the chaos at the bottom of the picture, the turmoil of the world, and then you have the serenity and the holiness of the top of the mountain, and that's brought together.
He told his students later that he had trouble getting the Christ figure staying up in the clouds, and that it was kind of visually sinking, and that what he did was he emphasized the curved cloud under the feet, which visually lifted him up. And I think that's something he learned and used even in his much more abstract paintings later.
There was a great deal of ferment going on in Paris. It was the place to find out everything that was new. And there were so many artists working in so many different ways that you could really pick your influence and start from there.
Being in France had a big impact on his paintings. The canvas seemed to kind of burst with color.
He particularly interested in the way Matisse used color as a volume and not as just a filler in.
The post-impressionists took that freed up color of the impressionists and used it for expressive purposes. And in a sense, that's what Carles was doing the whole rest of his painting career. They were all there playing billiards and drinking and talking about art and going to the galleries together. Carles met Rodin through Steichen. He met Brancusi. And it must have been wonderful. The Steichens had a garden and they had people out there and there was wonderful conversation about art. Well, this was a kind of really revolutionary period in Paris. It was kind of the beginning of Picasso and Braque developing Cubism. Carles saw a lot of this, and we know that he went to the home of Leo and Gertrude Stein, the brother and sister that had started building this wonderful collection of Renoir and Cézanne and Picasso and Matisse. But Carles, when he talked about it, when he was interviewed in the 20s, said he found it confusing. He came into this, this collection just bursting with these paintings that were so different than anything he had seen.
And so I am trying to tell you what doing portraits meant to me. I had to find out what it was inside anyone, and by anyone I mean everyone. I had to find out inside everyone what was in them that was intrinsically exciting, and I had to find out not by what they said, not by what they did, not by how much or how little they resembled any other one, but I had to find it out by the intensity of movement that there was inside in any one of them. If I could make a portrait of that inside them without any description of what they are doing and what they are saying, then I too was neither repeating nor remembering nor being in a confusion. You see what I mean by what I say? But I know you do.
Carles
was the bridge. He brought this theory back, and he worked on it more himself after he got here, experimenting on his own.
He had a brand new idea.
He took more risks. He started to do nude paintings and portraits of individuals using very sort of discordant colors, green coupled with red, and things that were not so pleasing to the eye, were not so what one might term like aesthetically pleasing.
Carles's use of color included white as a color, rather than absence of color or the representation of light. In other words, oh yes, we'll paint this part white because it's in very intense light. That's not, he just said, let's paint that white because it's a great color.
And it was a reaction against the mushiness, the sentimentality of 19th century Victorian approach to art and lots of other things.
We do know that Carles was married to Mercedes de Cordoba, an actress, designer, painter, musician, a multi-talented, beautiful woman.
And she would sit in a chair, and the chair would become a throne. And this is not just because I've seen pictures of her painted by Carles as Cleopatra or as something glamorous historically in special costume. It's because that's the way she was, and she had the most beautiful voice.
I do not know when I begin to paint what will appear on the finished canvas. If I could sit down, think, say this will look just so and so when I am through, then I should not paint. There would be no incentive. I paint to see what the idea will look like in reality.
He was just tireless in trying to win over the people here who were very stodgy.
Very stodgy.
Carles started teaching at the Pennsylvania Academy in 1917. His students talked about how when he looked at you, he had this tremendously intense gaze. It's almost like his eyes were kind of burning through you. He made other people feel very special.
One of the first things he said to me was, "Let yourself go." And that made a big difference in my painting.
I liked him as a teacher because he didn't intrude in what you were doing.
He looked at each person as an individual and sort of sensed what their strengths might be and worked with that.
Carles told you where you succeeded and where you failed and why. But he didn't tell you what to do, ever, and he never touched your canvas.
He also loved socializing with the students. He would go to their balls or work with them on the balls and go to parties and have exhibits with them. And, again, that was irritating to these people that were the more traditionalists.
He describes teaching almost in such sensual, erotic terms that it's like making love, that it's a transfer of so much between two people who are equal, not a teacher and a student, but each trying to learn from the other.
The position between student and master must be that both are students, but he who has most resolve must see the others evolve. The one taking the attitude of being taught should be made very happy. All creation comes from ecstasy.
He always liked to look at my nudes to see if he wanted to paint the model or not.
He was a sensualist. He loved the female figure. He loved its surface. He loved its changes, its voluptuousness. He liked to paint the blushing skin, the hair, the shape of the body.
At Chester Springs, we were surrounded by countryside, just real old-fashioned barns and pastures and grazing cattle, sheep. Most of those roads were not cemented in those days. They were just more like country farm roads. They usually had a model posing. You learned to draw the figure. Other times, with part of the buildings, there would be places where still life could be set up. If you're interested in landscape, that was really a great addition to what you get in an art school.
Carles was middle-class background, and the world that he traveled in was the upper-class world, a very successful, moneyed, leisurely, with servants and cars and summer places.
This group represented some of Philadelphia's upper crust. A lawyer patron of the arts was R. Sturgis Ingersoll, who went on to play an important role in the creation of the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
The subject of all works of art is the artist. He loves his art because he can find out more about himself. He absorbs things. He's hungry like everybody else. But he is also more envious of life. He wants to make it and does.
I think what's interesting, particularly about a number of Carles' most enthusiastic patrons, is they were also his students.
I always said that his palette was in Paris and his pocketbook was in Philadelphia.
The world as a whole was changing, was evolving, and I think that in some measure had to play itself out in Carles as someone who's expressing what he is viewing in society.
He painted after the First World War this magnificent painting, La Marseillaise.
One of the key things about it is that obviously it expresses his love for France. He must have felt deep horror at the fact that this country where he'd been visiting since he'd been a student, really, and his love for Matisse, his love for French culture, all of his friends being at the front, it really was quite traumatic for him. And so the idea of a nude woman wrapped in the tricolour, the liberty leading the people, he felt a deep empathy for the French people and for their art and culture.
The real painting comes in looking at these colors and how abstract they are and how they convey the sense of desperation, of war, of destruction, of pain. And that's where the artist is way ahead of us. They have thought all this through. They've struggled with it. He is not putting a brush stroke on there casually.
There is this break with the past, and in many respects that wooden cross that you see is as much to do with the Academy. It's as much to do with the old way of painting as it is to do with the World War I. He says, listen, this is the art of the future. They knew it was a transitional painting that announced a new direction in his work.
When you shall arrive as deep as you will need go to catch the blackfish, the hook has been featly baited by the art you have, and you do catch them with what thoroughness you know. Seize that glistening body, translate it to that language you will understand. Gut, clean, roast, garnish, and serve to yourself. Who better eat and enjoy, however you divide and share, that blackfish heft and shine is your own.
Freedom was very important to Carles, and when I think about the idea of being a modern artist, I think for him and for other people in the period, being modern meant you had choices. You could explore different things. He did not want to be pinned down to painting the same painting over and over again, and that was one of the reasons he never had a dealer.
He distrusted dealers. Well, he wasn't entirely wrong.
And not have a pressure of a gallery saying you've got to put up 25 paintings and they have to all look this image or that image, which can happen in New York. You can be pushed into, like, this is what your collectors like, we want more of these, and he didn't have that pressure.
And he said, I could have painted a lot of flower paintings and probably sold them, but instead of that, I was experimenting, I was delving into something new and different.
The interval between the explosion of flowers is like an interval in music, as vital as the flowers themselves. If there's one thing in all the world I believe, it's painting with color. So damn few people paint with color, and what on earth else is painting for?
The way he lived his life and the way he enjoyed his life. I mean, this is a work that is so embedded in the American art history. You know, it was made in Voulangis, in Steichen's studio. That there's a sense of American art history in the making. There's an excitement, you know. That's what I would say to any younger artist looking at this work, is you get the feel of art on the move. There's a whiplash line to this, you know. This is an artist who really is in full control of the way he applies paint, and just a real fondness for color. Carles, in his own way, this was what he gave to his students, was a way of making paintings structured around color. You see that the thickness of texture, Carles would go in again and again until he really gets the image right. He does use the raw canvas at times, but he also does love the sensuality of paint. You know, this is just raw pigment pushed around, built up, mixed, but sometimes straight out of a tube, and everything coalesces in a Carles.
Art is sought because it is a concentration, a distillation of the livingness of the artist. It can only show that it is possible.
He loved drinking, he loved women, he loved travel, he seemed to be a very good people person as far as I can see. He was always connecting with these interesting, wonderful personalities.
Well, Alfred Barnes and Carles were together for one reason. Barnes had made a lot of money. Well, he thought an art collection was a passport to society, and he sent Glackens, a very good Philadelphia painter, to Paris with an open checkbook to buy paintings. And he came back with 100 paintings, including Cézanne, Modigliani, all of them.
Carles persuaded Barnes to show them to Philadelphia, to show them to his hometown.
Arthur Carles and his colleagues organized a couple of the most adventurous exhibitions, art exhibitions in Philadelphia.
There were 75 works, and they certainly represented the radical edge of European modernism.
People flooded in, came from New York, came from the Eastern Seaboard. The catalog and the show was considered a breakthrough, a real knockout. And yet the newspaper saw it as degenerate, the work of people who were mentally disturbed.
They were the object of diseased minds as far as Philadelphia was concerned. And the Academy wasn't very enthusiastic either.
They really didn't understand the work. And yet that was the public image that Barnes had to accept and the Academy had to accept.
In the midst of all of this criticism by art educators in Philadelphia, there was one person who spoke out publicly in support of the new relationship, and that was Arthur Carles. He said, "Philadelphia does not appreciate, as it should, what Dr. Barnes is trying to do. There are only two kinds of painting, good and bad, and those of Dr. Barnes happen to be good."
I find myself eliminating detail after detail, always suppressing and selecting so as to give full emphasis to the thing I want to express. In the end, it is the intensity of action I intend to achieve.
He, in a sense, he lived on patronage. He lived as if he were a bohemian in a royalist society.
He liked Philadelphia. He was pretty much a town character, and he had his supporters in Philadelphia. He never really stuck his neck out in New York. But Carles didn't care. He didn't care whether his work was bought or sold.
But he was shown in New York. He had every decade a solo exhibition in New York, and people responded to that and talked about the music in his paintings. That was a big analogy to his color. I mean, he got good reviews from that, but apparently did not sell any paintings to New Yorkers. The people that bought the paintings were the ones, his friends in Philadelphia. He did have polarities, I think, in his emotions and also what he was trying to do in his art. Sometimes he wanted something that was very disciplined and clear, closer to the academic tradition, very controlled. And the other side was something that was almost wild and free and exuberant. He was teaching about freedom and modern art and use color and express yourself. And here the other teachers were talking about learn how to draw from the cast. You don't go anywhere till you master that. And Carles, at one point, the story is, and I think it's true, threw some of the plaster cast down the elevator shaft.
Well, in 1925, Carles was fired. I don't know whether it was drinking or whether they thought he was paying too much attention to some of the students, or whether it was his new ideas that he brought back from France.
There were a whole bunch of students that left the academy when he was fired in 1925. They petitioned to try to have him stay there. When that didn't work, they went and they left the academy and they went into his private class.
I went running as fast as I could after graduation, asking if I could be his pupil. I had a sample painting. He said, well, you haven't painted yet, but I think you can.
And it was just a place on Parkside Avenue, which was a rather dingy neighborhood. And we just painted, and he went around to each one of us, and as I say, Carles had just been to Europe and was full of these new ideas, and we just lapped them up.
Green is the great surface slider. It skids, makes blurred extensions. Green will move into anything except red. Outside this color, the center of the spectrum, colors generally go in pairs. At least red and black are the most stable. Stay put pair. The red becomes sullen and absorbent and movable. With yellow, it shows its full blood, pours all its strength into it, makes it sing or yell.
But what was he searching for was harmony, unity, a completeness in the canvases, a sense of beauty, and he separated himself. He didn't put his signature on every little canvas. He said, the whole canvas is my signature. What do you need my initials or name for?
Carles was someone who must have had mood swings, way up and way down. I remember when he was up, he was really up. When he saw things, it was just very, very intense and very clear. People said he saw things more vividly than other people. I mean, he just was somebody who was very sensitive. He reacted to things. But when something, I think, down came to him, and when he was at the point when he was able to paint, he didn't emphasize the downside. It was a kind of a triumphant side that he was able to bring out.
The necessity of coming down from the mountain and these things join together, that you don't leave the sorrow and the pain of the world, but these two things come together.
Artists are the scavengers who gather material from life and present it in a form that others may enjoy sin without themselves becoming tainted.
White, the use of white as space, as color, as volume. You can see the play of white in this canvas in different functions. Now he's also doing that with all the other, with colors. I mean, this is the billiard ball, this is the billiard table for the turkeys.
The other thing about the turkey is that he's done something wonderful with the curve of the wing. The curve, to me, is one of the sort of leitmotifs of his painting, that he uses a curve almost every composition to pull your eye around the canvas and through space, and it gives you almost a sensual feeling for the texture of the paint.
Many of us do not remember or know the impact of the Depression and the stock market crash, and the 10 years in which there was much less support and public availability of philanthropy and patronage and other things. For the whole society went through a real severe economic turndown.
Philadelphia was a typical mill town. It was a town with lots of hosiery mills, cotton mills, lace mills. They did everything of that sort. The streets were drab. I was going to New York a lot in those days. That was my first experience, and I saw the bright lights of Broadway, so to speak. And we had no bright lights in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia was very depressing, actually. There were many people who were out of work at that time. Of course, that was countrywide, the Depression, and people were looking for jobs, and Philadelphia itself was not very pretty.
Money was a problem. I mean, I don't get the sense that it bothered him that much. I mean, supposedly at the end of his life, if he got some money, some cash, he would hide it in a studio so that then he could discover it sometime and then all of a sudden have some when he needed it.
Carroll Tyson and his circle and friends who were all painters and appreciated Carles didn't deviate when times got bad or he'd said something or did something he may have acted out at a dinner party.
Carles was supported to the end of his life by people like Carroll Tyson.
The second marriage was in 1927, and I think he didn't care about the rent, the utilities, the day-to-day bills, or child rearing. So marriage didn't appeal to him. He took her to the ship with a baby in Le Havre, and they got on the ship, and he said, "Pardon me, I have to go do something," and he didn't turn up for 2 years.
But then after that, they lived together the rest of his life.
But that's a 2-year break.
Right. But
who pays the rent?
I, even I, am he who knoweth the roads through the sky, and the wind thereof is my body. I have beheld the Lady of Life, I, even I, who fly with the swallows. Green and gray is her raiment, trailing along in the wind. I, even I, am he who knoweth the roads through the sky, and the wind thereof is my body. Manus animam pinxit. My pen is in my hand, to write the acceptable word, my mouth to chant the pure singing. The moon is a great pearl in the waters of sapphire, cool to my fingers flowing the waters. I, even I, am he who knoweth the roads through the sky, and the wind thereof is my body. I will return unto the halls of the flowing, of the truth of the children of Ashu. I, even I, am he who knoweth the roads of the sky, and the wind thereof is my body.
He'd gotten hold of some bad whiskey, and he was really either completely blind or almost blind for a little while. So he had this huge magnifying glass. It was just a hunk of glass like this, which he carried in his pocket, and it was so heavy that his jacket was always down on one side. And he'd take this thing out and scrutinize. I don't know how he painted.
We recovered from that, and after that painted some of his most glorious paintings and still lifes. I mean, again, renewed his, love of seeing.
Carroll Tyson built this wonderful little house for him, or bought it, and even put a wall between the pavement and the house in the French fashion, which he adored.
And they really made it as perfect for him as they could. The whole top floor, the roof was lifted up, the top floor was made into a studio with skylights, with a way to lift big paintings up, hook them up. There was a dumbwaiter so he could have food sent up if he didn't want to be disturbed. It was beautiful. It had teak floors. He could close up the trap door so his wife couldn't even talk to him. He had a blackboard. He could do sketches, mirrors, anything he wanted.
And
Space.
it didn't work.
It turns out he really couldn't work there very well because there was so much, he and his wife were both drinking, both fighting. There was just tremendous tension, tremendous conflict, so he took a studio in town. Pearl Harbor, the beginning of World War II, actually affected him very deeply. That was December 7th, 1941, and it was on December 17th that he had his fall and consequent stroke that ended his whole painting career.
Marin was particularly close to Carles, and in fact he publishes a lovely tribute to Carles when Carles dies. And Marin at that time was the leading painter of his day. So that was the company that Carles kept. He was really considered one of the greats.
All that he felt, false, dishonest, hypocritical, he hated with his whole being. A curious makeup, this man, almost devoid of jealousies and conceits. As for his being, as an artist, he must have sensed, as those capable knew, that he had beautiful color sense, which he put down in flowing streams. A real lover of paint, as paint, I imagine, standing before his work saying, "I mustn't be fooled." Yet I would say this man was so much the artist in his being that it all, his work, has value, distinction, and vitality not too often found.
At the end of his career, end of his painting career, he was in the forefront of American painting. He was 10 years ahead of other artists that became famous as abstract expressionists.
Everybody felt that he was the great innovator and a perfectly extraordinary artist.
I looked at that work and I thought, God, why doesn't anybody know about him? Why he wasn't better known outside Philadelphia, let alone in it?
Carles never pursued fame. He couldn't care less.
Carles, though, was such a strong personality. I doubt that even if he had had regular commercial kind of success, I don't think it would have affected his work. I think he would have just done what Carles wanted to do.
You're not going to be able to pin Arthur Carles down and say he was this or he was that, because you look at 3 different paintings, and while it's fascinating to know that they were painted by the same artist and while they share a very intense interest in color, they're very different.
But I think what Carles showed me is that there's no need to be completely sort of static in your expression or have one way of expressing your viewpoints or the way that you interpret what's around you, that you can change, that you can evolve, that you can be suggestible in the best sense of that word.
It must have come from Carles that we were brought up with the idea that to be a painter was almost a sacred undertaking.
There's a terrific luminosity because of the conjunction of the color. The response of one color to another color gives his work that inner light.
He kept reaching for the stars, and you never reach the stars. You can reach a human equivalent of recognition, success, notoriety, but Carles wasn't interested in that. He was interested in a canvas that would sing.